Welcome to our PhD lecture series and scholarly writing for publication. And today we intend to go to lecture 11 and cover theory building, but from the confirm stage perspective. Just to remind you a few things that we did cover last time. We started our journey on theory building, and we did look at the phases of theory building. And if you remember, there's a diagram that I gave you, and still the diagram is flashed on the screen here. I hope you'll be able to remember that diagram very well. We've used it from lecture 5, lecture 6, lecture 7, lecture 8, lecture 9, and lecture 10. And of course, what you see there are what we call the stages of theory building. And the stages of theory building, as we saw, start with the conceptualize phase, and then we move to operationalize phase. And we did cover those two phases, but we are left with the confirm stage, apply stage, and the refine stage. So in today's lecture, we intend to cover the confirm phase, because confirm phase is very important, ladies and gentlemen. Now, of course, as you can see, theory building is very important in scholarly research and academic research. And confirmation, or this confirmation, is seen as a respectable endpoint for theory building in applied disciplines, ladies and gentlemen. And until now, as you may have noticed, that is not, until now, most scholars do not move to that level of the confirm stage. After developing a theory, they actually conclude and they end there. Now, to confirm a theory is not a one-time event, right? And of course, as you can see, initial efforts give the theorist enough direction to continue working on a theory, or scrap it and they start all over again. And the refined phase, as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, dictates additional confirmation. And you need really the additional confirmation efforts that are often started in the confirm stage. And therefore, the purpose of this lecture is to describe specific approaches to the confirm phase of theory building in applied disciplines, as presented in our figure 1 that you have already seen and you continue to see. And specifically, this lecture will define the confirm phase, because we need to understand it very well. I will go ahead and describe the general inputs to this phase. And of course, basing on what we've been doing in the previous lectures, of course, the outputs of the previous phase will certainly become the inputs of this phase. If you remember, at the conceptualized stage, the output of the conceptualized certainly became the inputs for the operationalized phase, and the outputs of the operationalized phase will certainly become the inputs of the confirm stage. So therefore, I'm going to define the phase, describe the general inputs to this phase, summarize the pros and cons of confirmation approaches, and describe the outputs of the confirm phase. And of course, there are many other things that we shall see thereafter, because we shall be able to describe the quality indicators for the confirm phase, ladies and gentlemen. So what is confirmation? We need to understand confirmation. This thing called confirmation, what is it? When we say we are confirming a theory, what are we referring to? The confirm phase brings theorizing into the realm of research and disciplinary inquiry, but requires its application to real-life situations. So remember, we develop theories, right, in order to explain reality out there. And then after developing this theory, we must be able to confirm whether it captures the aspects of reality that we intended to capture. So in this phase, as you can see, theorists plan, theorists design, and theorists implement, ladies and gentlemen, and evaluate a program of investigation. Now, to confirm or disconfirm whether the theory fits in the real world becomes an important element, because the whole essence of theory building is to try and explain reality out there. So the results of the confirm phase can establish a sense of confidence in the theory and, of course, steer the theorist into other phases for adjustments. And as you can see, virtually every inquiry study is a confirm or disconfirmation, right? So almost every study you see, we intend to confirm or disconfirm a particular theory. So we go through those activities of confirmation and disconfirmation. So however, as we can see, most authors of these studies are not very clear about the role they play in assessing or contributing to a given theory. And that's why it's always very important when you are doing your research, you bring in the theoretical perspectives so that we understand at the end of the day the role you are playing. So even when we are talking about theoretical implications, right, we need to understand the feedback that you are giving to those fellows who develop the theories. Now, of course, you can see because most theories involve numerous relationships. Now, the confirm phase almost always require multiple instances of inquiry to make overall judgments about the theory. Now, of course, the theorist has doubts, the theorist has hopes, and are craving to know the answer. They want to know whether a particular theory is applicable, whether it works, and whether it will be able to explain reality out there. And for sure, doubts provoke a desire for confirmation. So that is quite important for us to note at this stage. So can we then look at the inputs to confirming theories? What are those particular inputs when we attempt to confirm these theories? Now, the confirm phase is focused on a number of things, and of course that aim at confirming a particular theory. The confirm phase, as you can see, is a focused investigation within the theory building process that requires theory implementation in practice. Now, other activities within the process can call upon what we call theory in action or theory in practice, but in the confirm phase, it is mandatory for us to do that, ladies and gentlemen. So the confirm disconfirm investigation has features similar to most inquiry strategies. That is really planning, that is design, implementation, and evaluation. Now, of course, these are all required inputs into the theory building process. Now, the detail of an investigation is influenced by the complexity of the theory realm under consideration. And if you recall, in our previous lecture, if I'm not mistaken, I did tell you that these theories that are developed can be classified into three. Of course, you've got what we call the grand theories, then you have the mid-range theories, and then we've got the local theories. And of course, they are classified according to the boundaries and the kind of things that they intend to explain. So the detail of an investigation, especially at the confirm stage, is influenced by the complexity of the theory under consideration. Now, if the theory has so many things and intends to explain a number of aspects in the wide environment, then you know that you have a very big job when when it comes to the confirm stage. And of course, that also has a relationship with the what is required. And of course, we do not even have a single answer to the activities that we undertake here. So there is not one answer to this challenge. So we go through a number of things, and we take time trying to test these theories and so forth. And of course, we do not really have, if you are an inventor, you can always talk about a lab that you have, and then you can talk about a lot of learning that takes place in the lab, and even the tests that you undertake. But in developing a theory, we really, there's a lot of intellectual effort that is expended. And of course, you will be able to fail many times. But of course, you can always use the statements that were used by Thomas Edison, the productive and famous inventor, who spent enormous time trying to learn about the increments and confirmations. And then later on, he came up with the writings. But one of his most famous quotes of the time, he said, "I have not failed. I have just found 10,000 ways that won't work." And of course, that's what he says. So in contrast, as you can see, to Edison, a man who had probably a lab somewhere, most theory investigators do not own an invention laboratory, but they just need to set up their investigations more strategically, and their efforts at planning, designing, implementing, and evaluating an appropriate investigation becomes very critical and very important. And they are all driven by the dominant research question arising from the maturation of the theory and the development. So why don't we then look at approaches to confirming theories? What are those particular approaches that we go through in confirming theories, ladies and gentlemen? So I think you can see it's very important for us to understand those approaches if we must really work very well. So, of course, while ideological differences undergird many research paradigms, the intent of this lecture, ladies and gentlemen, is to be aware of those differences and to be intellectually agile enough to move across the various paradigms logically and not ideologically. So when we start really testing, right, theories and trying to confirm these theories, right, as an intellectual person, we must be agile to move across logical paradigms, right, or what we call, you go through these paradigms logically, but not ideologically, with lots of emotions about them. So if you are logical, then we know that the challenge is to call upon the most rational approach to confirming, given the theory under investigation. So rationality will be the major deciding factor in this case. Let me just give you an example. For example, a researcher drawn toward qualitative research methods and more specifically phenomenology needs to logically reach back to the research problem decision. And of course, when you do that, the tentative research question posed in the confirmation effort must be understood very well, right? So while the problem area is of high interest to the investigator, if the present status of the theory is not logically brought forward, then the investigator, he or she, may naively choose a favored methodology, and in this case, phenomenology, right, when there is already a great deal that is known related to the theory research question by the way of self-report and storytelling data. So you could be having lots of data about this, meaning that you don't have to really use phenomenology. But if you go through the entire process logically, then you'll be able to do the right thing. Right. Maybe since I'm mentioning words which seem to be new in this case, like phenomenology, I need to probably explain what phenomenology is all about. Now, phenomenology, as we have already seen, helps us to understand the meaning of people's lived experiences. Phenomenology helps us to understand the lived experiences of it. Choose these approaches logically, not ideologically, right? I know there are certain individuals who are attached to certain things and they cannot easily probably move away from them. So the quantitative, as we've already seen, we've got a number of approaches here. You can have qualitative, you can have quantitative, right, to try and confirm the theory, right? So why don't I begin with the quantitative approach to the confirm phase. So quantitative approach to confirm phase. Now the quantitative orientation to theory building is based on scientific method, and I'm sure you are aware of that. And of course, it's also based on traditional hypothesis testing. So in this case, reality is viewed as objective, and the theorist's task is simple: to establish laws that can predict behavior in an area of human activity. And the quantitative research process can be viewed as a 5-step process, determining the basic questions to be answered by the study. Right, you'll begin from there, and remember you are coming from the philosophical perspective, which tells you that reality is viewed, well, reality is objective, right? Meaning that you can actually capture that reality, and it's not very, very dynamic, and therefore use the quantitative approach, and you must go through a number of stages, a number of phases. So you must determine the basic question to be answered by the study. You must also determine the participants setting for the study, and that's really the population, the sample. Then you must move on to selecting the methods needed to answer the questions. And of course, within the methods, issues of variables will come up, measurement of variables, issues of the overall design. You will move on, right, from design to selecting the analytical tools that you intend to use to analyze and make meaning of your data. And then from there, you move to understanding and interpreting the results, because after testing, you have the results, but you must interpret what those results mean, and you must certainly be able to generalize your results. So most discussions about qualitative research, of course, present quasi-experimental and true experimental designs, ladies and gentlemen. So those are the quantitative aspects, and quantitative research is very important. You can also, as I've already said, go into experiments to try and explain causal relationships, right? What causes the other. Experiments are quite robust and good enough because you are able to manipulate the independent variable in this case to see what happens to the criterion variable over an extended period of time. So the explanations can easily be obtained, and you can also dismiss early assumptions. And of course, at this material time, I will not really discuss pre-experimental designs and the true experimental designs, but probably we shall be able to look at those things later on. But we can note that the key aspects to experimental designs involve the random assignment to a treatment or a control group, which helps to ensure that the two groups are equivalent in terms of history and the other pre-existing circumstances or conditions that may influence the results, ladies and gentlemen. Qualitative research, right? We can now talk about the qualitative approaches. I've just gone through the quantitative ones briefly, and I really think at this material time we know these approaches. Even quantitative, I'll just summarize or give you an overview, because we shall have more lectures dealing with this aspect and treating qualitative research in detail. Here we are dealing with the confirmation of a theory and just telling you that we can use quantitative or qualitative to confirm a theory. Now for qualitative, again, as you can see, it is useful to understand different models of knowledge as contributing different snapshots of the same rim. So quantitative research, for example, can yield broad trends and excellent demographic snapshots, right? If you're talking about the quantitative approach, quantitative approach or research does that very well, right? So you have those broad things. It has limits in trying to understand, for example, the black box, right, process. Of course, if you read Guba and Lincoln and Guba 1985 and 1998, you will be able to understand what we are talking about. So the quantitative cannot give you data on the lived experiences, right? How individuals and groups go about sense-making in organizations, right? That information cannot be obtained from quantitative, so you must undertake a qualitative study, right? Of course, let me put a figure on the board here so that you understand exactly the things that we are talking about, right? That figure is crucial, right, because it explains a number of things, and again, bring in the qualitative, the quantitative, and the mixed, and that figure will remain on the board on the screen for quite some time, because I'll be talking about those aspects, and I've already started talking about those aspects as well, the quantitative, and that is the quantitative confirm information, and the qualitative perspective. So I've already told you that the quantitative is very useful, but there are so many things in the black box that cannot be explained by quantitative research, and that's why we need qualitative research, especially when we are interested in the lived experiences of the individuals in their settings, right? So as you can see, researchers pursuing qualitative studies look for instances of knowledge creation, instances of new insights, instances of new understanding, both in their research participants and in themselves. And that's why you see that diagram there that has qualitative and quantitative. So researchers are certainly open to invention and construction. Researchers are open to a number of things as they navigate from objects to objectivity, as they navigate between subjects and subjectivity. So you know you have subjects, but you want to get rid of subjectivity and try to reduce subjectivity, but again, you want to capture the experiences of these individuals. So qualitative methods offer the best possibility of understanding how individuals both make sense of and perform in their social and organizational worlds. And of course, formal tests, ladies and gentlemen, and measurements do not easily allow us to ask how individuals and groups make sense of their own worlds. So you'll find the qualitative research being able to articulate these things and bring the hidden events about these individuals. Now, of course, by observing and communicating face-to-face, investigators can come to understand the meaning-making strategies individuals create and depend on a pattern formed in a particular theory. So when we pick the lived experiences of these individuals and try to make sense of these patterns, then we come up with the what we call information or themes or patterns that certainly make us understand the meaning-making strategies that individuals create and depend on, ladies and gentlemen. And in pattern models, something is explained when it is so related to a set of other elements that together they constitute a unified system. So in this case, we understand something by identifying it as a specific part in an organized world. And the utility of pattern theories is their sensitivity to and reflection of human systems, including organizational forms. And of course, one benefit of pattern theories is that they prompt researchers to see rims and study as pieces of more unified, interconnected, and holistic systems. So we need to try and understand the kind of activities we undertake at the confirm stage. Remember, the theory building process begins with the conceptualization, right? You will have an understanding of concepts that you use in building some kind of model or some kind of framework. You must go through the operationalization, right? And the operationalization stage will certainly end up or end in a model that is, of course, conceptualization ends in a model, right? And operationalization, you attempt to measure some of those things that are placed in the model. And at this level of confirm, we try to test that model and see whether it fits reality. And that's the confirm stage. So it's very important for us to really understand the testing grounds very well and be able to know that we can use the quantitative tools or the qualitative tools depending on our philosophical orientations. And then we can also have mixed methods approach to the confirm phase. I'm sure you can still see this diagram, this figure on the board. And this figure is very interesting because on one side, as you can see, you've got a procedure, right? Then, of course, as you can see, procedure, you can have survey, you can have structured observations, you can have chart audits, then you can have a number of other things, statistical analysis. Right, so you can see the quant data collection there. Of course, quantitative. There are those quantitative tools. And of course, the quantitative tools will lead you to quantitative data analysis, as you can see on the diagram, where you have the numeric data, where you have the test statistic. You can even use structural equation modeling, right? Again, when you go to qualitative data, that is the second bit of it, you see, we talk about the procedure, and procedure, you have the semi-structured interviews, the observations, we've got documents, right, that we review, and then we have artifacts. All that information is very important. And then after obtaining that information, we certainly code that information. And then we come up with themes. So thematic analysis become very important. And then, of course, you'll have the results, ladies and gentlemen. And, of course, the product of the qualitative is in terms of text data, it's in terms of image data, it's in terms of codes, it's in terms of themes, and in terms of grounded theory. Now, if you're going to use a mixed method, right, you can actually do these things separately. And then at the end of the day, you bring together the results with an objective of comparing the results, right? And certainly you come up with what we call a composite model, ladies and gentlemen. So that's what we have in the qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods. And of course, again, it depends on the paradigm that you have. And if you're going to use mixed methods, the way I've just described it here, then you are talking about the multi-paradigm approach to theory building, and that is really where you must bring in these data points or probably information you pick from the field. And of course, if you have competing philosophical orientations, you will have a challenge. at the end of the day, because you must make a decision anyway. But competing philosophical orientations pose varying problems for theorists that are not easily solved or are not easily settled. Yet it is just these variations that offer the possibility of confirming. They offer the possibility of disconfirming from a mixed methods approach. For example, grounded theory is a philosophical orientation which is focused on using data to generate hypotheses. Now, grounded theorists begin by collecting data in an area of human systems activity. Now, the data are used to build hypotheses that are grounded in the phenomenon rather than formulated by the theorist ahead of time. Now, the constant interplay between gathering and analyzing data is the dominant feature of this orientation, both qualitative and quantitative. And the case study method, as you can see, is another aspect that can be combined within the qualitative and quantitative to form what we call mixed methods. So the case establishes clear boundaries, for the theory building effort, and can purposefully accommodate a variety of data collection and analysis methods, both qualitative and quantitative. So case studies are very important, and of course many people have argued over time that it's better to use mixed methods because, for example, the quantitative approach will handle the weaknesses of the qualitative, and the quantitative also handles the weaknesses of the other approach. So at the end of the day, there is that argument, but mixing the two isn't very easy. But of course, Creswell has given us guidelines on how we can actually mix the qualitative research studies with quantitative research studies, ladies and gentlemen. So mixed method designs can have qualitative and quantitative investigations carried out in a sequence. And that's why we talk about sequential. If you look at Creswell, it talks about sequential, but at the same time, they can be carried out simultaneously, ladies and gentlemen. Simultaneously, you'll be talking about the concurrent research design. So the diagram that I've just given you here on the board, that's on the screen, that you are still seeing, is a very good example of mixed methods concurrent research design, and that is really our figure 2, as you can see. Mixed methods but concurrent. So in other words, qualitative is done at the same time with the quantitative, quantitative, and then you compare the results at the end of the day, and then you come up with a composite model, ladies and gentlemen. And the diagram I'm showing you there is taken from Creswell 2005. But let me just give you some kind of variations to the same kind of mixed methods. And one of the variation is what we call a sequential explanatory design. Because you can have mixed methods, which is concurrent, But I also said you can have a mixed methods, which is sequential. You do it in sequence, You start with one and you end with the other, but you can also do these things at the same time. Now, a sequential explanatory design involves a quantitative data collection phase. So we start with the data collection. Then after examining and establishing relationships, or associations between constructs, then we must ask ourselves a major question as to why that association exists, And if we start questioning why this association, why this kind of relationship, why, does this kind of thing exist, then we go into explanatory research. So you start with the quantitative, you establish, a relationship or an association, and then from there you follow it up by a phase of qualitative data collection so that you explain why that kind of pattern exists, ladies and gentlemen. Now, of course, this design is used to follow up on quantitative results from experiments, from surveys or correlational studies by in-depth probing of the results through qualitative data from focus group interviews or individual interviews or observations, and that's what we call sequential, ladies and gentlemen, explanatory design. Start with the quantitative research, right? Establish, right, an association, establish a relationship, right, or a particular phenomenon existing, and then you say, well, I need to understand this better. So you design now a qualitative study to try and explain why that pattern of behavior exists. And that's what we call sequential explanatory design. Of course, you're still seeing that on the screen there, but of course, on the screen, I'm presenting the two mixed methods approaches. But you can also go for sequential exploratory design. Exploratory design. Now, of course, that sequential exploratory design features qualitative data collection that is followed up with a phase of quantitative. So it is exploratory because little is known about a particular phenomenon and the behaviors that you see, right? So because little is known, you go out to explore, right? So that's why you actually begin with the qualitative data collection, right, for exploration purposes. Now, of course, after completing the qualitative, you go for quantitative. Now, this design, ladies and gentlemen, is typically used to develop quantitative instruments when the variables are not known, or to explore preliminary qualitative findings from a small group of people with a randomized sample from a larger population. So that's why you have this kind of study. But of course, as you can see, collecting both quantitative and qualitative data simultaneously allows the investigator to converge the data, to make comparisons between detailed, contextualized quantitative and qualitative data, ladies and gentlemen. So that is what it is. You can go into explanatory research, you can go into exploratory research, but all that will depend on the philosophy that underlie the theory development. So, of course, the person developing the theory here is very, very important, and is the one who determines the direction that the confirmation stage must take. Now, the confirm phase of theory building, right, has a number of critical steps that we need to think about, that we need to analyze, that we need to understand, ladies and gentlemen. So I can tell you at this material time that the confirm phase of theory building entails three numeric and critical steps, right? For example, the first one will be to design, and you must come up with a proper design of the inquiry that you want to undertake. So design the appropriate inquiry studies. So that will be the first stage. Design the appropriate inquiry study. 2, collect and analyze the data, right? And of course, number 3 is to connect the results to the theory, ladies and gentlemen. So these steps are very important because they tell us exactly what we are supposed to do. And I'm giving you a diagram here on the board that I think you are seeing. And this diagram is so critical because it brings out those areas that I have already articulated, right? So as I've already told you, right, that designed that stage that we call confirm stage, right? Will involve three major stages that I've already given you. But if you look at that diagram very well, because I need to say something about the diagram, that diagram of the confirm phase, the steps in the confirm phase of theory building, right, you've got the inputs there, right? The inputs certainly were the outputs of the operationalized phase of theory building, where we had the propositions, we had results, indicators, and we had research questions. Now, of course, these three, right, stages that I'm talking about proceed from the inputs that we get. So, in other words, you design the inquiry, right? You collect and analyze data. You connect the results to the theory that has been developed. And then you'll have outputs. Now, in that diagram, and that diagram summarizes very well the things that we want to talk about, under the design stage, design the inquiry, you can still use quantitative research, you can use qualitative research, you can use mixed methods. And in the interest of time, I will not go through these things because I've already talked about them. At the stage of collect and analyze the data, of course, you design a survey, again, depending on the philosophical orientation you have and stance, right? You can, for instance, have mixed methods. And then in the mixed methods, again, you tell us whether it is sequential explanatory or sequential exploratory research, right? And of course, other designs exist because there are about 6, and I'll not go through them now, but maybe later on, Cresswell has given us guidelines on how we can do that. And then after that, we get the data, right? We analyze the data, we interpret the data, right? So data interpretation in a theory framework becomes very logical and very important. And then we try to also have connections to the propositions, and answering the research questions become very important. So the outputs of this stage, ladies and gentlemen, are very critical because we will have established the relationship between these constructs, right? And then, we shall, at this stage, we make judgment on what is happening out there, ladies and gentlemen. So these are very important decisions that researchers must make, especially those who are interested in theory building, ladies and gentlemen. So those 3 steps are very important. And of course, I've given you the outputs, and you just have to really think through these things, ladies and gentlemen. So, in summary, ladies and gentlemen, the general outputs of the confirm phase of theory building are evidence on which to judge the fit or accuracy of the theory, a judgment of the fit or accuracy of the theory, and the interpretation of what judgment means for application. So I'm going to put up another figure here. But I think we shall not put up another figure. This figure that we have already on the board explains those things that I've been talking about. So the 3 outputs are very important, and they will vary in depth and form for each theory exercise, but they must be drawn together by the theorists in a way that instills confidence that the theory captures some aspect of human and systems interaction with a degree of accuracy. Remember the confirm stage, we test the theory to see whether it actually explains reality. So let me, as I move towards the end, ladies and gentlemen, I want to give you the quality indicators for the confirm phase. And these quality indicators are very important because unless we understand the quality indicators, then we will not be able to come up with the right product at the end of the day. So the key quality indicators for the confirm phase are drawn directly from the works of Patterson, 1986. Patterson came up with a criteria. And these aspects are: one, comprehensiveness, right? Two, empirical validity and verifiability. And then number three, practicability. Remember, we are dealing with the confirm phase, and we are trying to test the theory and confirm. So the quality indicators then should be in terms of comprehensiveness. How comprehensive is the theory, right? And we need also to test for the validity and the verifiability of the theory and the practicability of the theory. And these three criteria are particularly relevant to this phase of theory building because they describe the desired outputs. Right, so let's begin with the comprehensiveness because we need to understand that very well. A theory should be complete, covering the area of interest and including all known data in the field. So that's why theory takes quite some good time to develop. You can't say that in this study I have developed a theory. No, we need to test the theory. And moreover, from a number of perspectives. So we must have a number of testing grounds, right? So when we test the theory in a number of settings, then we'll be able to come up with the final position of the theory as to whether it works or it doesn't work. And then if it doesn't work, back to the drawing board, because we must come up with a theory that will capture reality. A good theory is that theory that is able to explain the realities of a particular setting or environment or community or communities. So surely in this case, if you're talking about theory building, a theory is comprehensive, right? If it is complete, covering the area of interest and including all the known data, right? But now comprehensiveness can also mean, can also refer to all the relationships being examined before a judgment is made. Remember, we test those links which are presented in the conceptual model or theoretical model, and comprehensive if all of them are examined and interrogated in detail and found to hold under various situations or circumstances. And of course, uninvestigated parts of a theory could be critical to its operation, and if left alone or if left unknown, then its optimal understanding would not have been reached. Now, the assessment of the theory and all of its relationships should be comprehensive in order to draw the most useful conclusions. So let's go to the third characteristic or third quality indicator to theory development, but confirm phase, right? And that's empirical validity or verifiability. A theory must be supported by experiences or experiments that confirm it. And that's why we test, and most of the work we do in research is actually test the theories or even develop theories. That is, in addition to its consistency with or ability to account for what is already known, a theory must generate new knowledge, right? However, a theory that is disconfirmed by experiment may lead indirectly to new knowledge by stimulating the development of a better theory, ladies and gentlemen. And that's very important. So in short, a theory must have evidence to support it, and that evidence must be plain evidence, and it must be simple. Right, so we can look at another characteristic, that is the practicability of a theory. One of the most important criteria for theory in general is whether the theory is useful to practitioners in organizing their thinking. Remember, the practitioners are the fellows who are in the field in various settings, and of course, first with the numerous challenges, right? And they want to explain those behaviors that they see. So when you talk about practicability, that becomes very important. How practical is the theory? How relevant is the theory to the practitioners? And that's why in most cases when you undertake research, we ask you to provide what we call practical implications, right? I know you'll have the theoretical implications. Theoretical implications, right, are the ones that I have already articulated. Remember, theory development, and you must confirm the theory, right? Because you've gone through the conceptualized stage, you've gone through the operationalized phase, you now come to the confirm phase. You are confirming the theory, therefore you must give feedback to the theory developers at the end of the day. So that's why we talk about confirm phase, right? But the other element that is very important as a quality indicator is practicability. How practical is your theory, right? Is it able to explain reality out there? So you can see a theory is useful, right, if it can be used by the practitioners out there. Now, this criteria is also perhaps the most important output of the confirm phase, and very critical and very important. That's why a good theory must get practitioners beyond trial and error use of techniques. Instead, the goal is the rational application of principles. So theories must be useful, and they must change the way things are done within the human systems they are intended to improve or even explain. So we don't simply do research for the sake of doing research, right? We do research because we want to generate new knowledge, because we want to explain reality out there, right? And that's why the practicability element becomes very important. So practicability is also the bridge to the next phase of theory building, which is the apply phase. And I will be going to the apply phase in our next lecture, which is actually lecture 12, ladies and gentlemen. So as you can see, there are numerous theories about how families and workplaces and communities and nations change over time. And of course, we've got researchers like Putnam, you know him very well, sociologist Robert Putnam, discusses the challenges in measuring change as part of confirming or rejecting theories. And he and others lay out a similar argument stating, no single source of data is flawless, but the more numerous and diverse the sources, the less likely that they could all be influenced by the same flaw. And therefore, they are actually telling you that you need to use more than possibly one approach to research. Now, looking at a single survey is not enough to confirm a theory, and that's why you must look at other approaches. And therefore, survey data along with the institutional data and behaviors over time provide the basis for change theory confirmation, ladies and gentlemen. So using multiple sources of data in conducting confirmational research is very important and is referred to as triangulation. So Putnam certainly emphasizes triangulation of sources, triangulation of data, triangulation of everything. Now, so ladies and gentlemen, as I said that I will be concluding and I will be finishing very soon, allow me now to summarize and conclude our lecture, ladies and gentlemen. So, ladies and gentlemen, this lecture summarized the confirm phase of theory building in applied disciplines. So, I have attempted to take you through a number of things, and I've given you diagrams that summarize the issues that we have discussed. So, the lecture certainly has managed to provide that summary of what the confirm phase is all about. First, we reviewed general approaches and strategies for confirming or disconfirming theories, if you call, and we did describe that process very well. And then I also say that given the vast amount of literature available concerning how to design inquiry studies, theorists should gather a variety of perspectives and detailed approaches in their paradigm area. And 3 general steps in the confirm phase were discussed. I hope you still remember the diagram that I gave you, and incidentally that diagram can be brought back on the screen, and that was actually figure 3, as you can see it is on the screen. Those 3 include the design the appropriate inquiry studies, collect and analyze data, and of course connect the results to the theory, ladies and gentlemen. So we described these steps at a general level because their detailed execution depends entirely on choices made previously in theory building process. We also looked at outputs and quality indicators for the confirm phase, and that's where I almost ended, right, before I gave you this conclusion. Now, of course, the core work of this phase, ladies and gentlemen, is to assess the adequacy of the theory through rigorous inquiry studies and ultimately a slew of evidence for all the relationships that wind up in theory is required to support it and establish its fit within the real world. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, the theorist must make interpretations about what a confirmed theory means for working in human-made systems and how some aspect of it should be changed in order to really capture most of those things, ladies and gentlemen. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I said earlier on, that is really the phase that I thought was very important for us to cover under theory building, right? And if you remember very well, we started our theory building process in lecture 5, right from lecture 5, 6 up to where we are now. And of course, we saw that the phases of theory building include conceptualize, then we go to operationalize phase, which we have already covered. We go to the confirm phase that we have covered in this lecture. Our next lecture, which will be lecture 12, ladies and gentlemen, will try to deal with the apply phase and the refine phase. But one of the things we should never forget in this process of theory building, we either move from inductive to deductive, and that is really theory to practice, or we can actually move from, as I said, you can move from deductive to inductive. So deductive to inductive is from theory to practice, but you can also move from inductive, right, to deductive, and that is really practice to theory, ladies and gentlemen. So with that summary, I would like to really thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for turning up for this lecture, which was lecture 11, dealing with the confirm phase of theory building. I hope you have managed to pick knowledge that will help you in your theory building process. But I must say it has been a pleasure for me to meet you. I can say stay well, stay safe. I wish you a nice time. Bye, ladies and gentlemen.